The latest tech.
I'm Alexa. I can answer your questions.
Interviews.
There will be several dozen shows trickling in over the months.
Accessibility.
We're actually running a pilot scheme with the CNIB at the moment.
This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome to another edition of Double Tap Television. Thank you guys so much for being here. I am Mark Aflalo, soon to be joined by Stephen Scott. But before we bring Stephen on, I want to remind you guys to get in touch with us. It's feedback@AMI.CA. That, of course, is our email address where we welcome any kind of communication from you guys, whether it's a compliment on a show well done or a suggestion for something or just something we talked about. Also on Twitter, it is @DoubleTapCanada. And don't forget that hashtag, which is AskDoubleTap, which allows us to get and find your tweets a lot easier. Stephen Scott, how you feeling this week? I hope you're all pumped up and ready to dig into our drawers.
Well, yes, indeed. I will say that this idea of this segment came from me. I do take ownership of it, and all complaints must, though, because Mark is the executive producer, has to officially go to him. So I managed to scrape by this one yet again.
Here's what happened, okay? AMI Audio, obviously, is the audio channel over at AMI.CA. Double Tap Canada airs every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Now, you did an incredible segment, which was what's in your drawers. And it allows people to kind of do what we do, which is dig into our drawers every single day and go, oh, look, I didn't realize I still had that piece of kit, or whoa, where did that come from? Which really is, it's kind of a fun discovery into our past and of course, our hoarding existence and the way that we keep everything that we have in our drawers.
Yep.
You got a lot of great feedback from people. The kind of disclaimer that I love to throw out is that on my end of things here, it's going to be less of the assistive tech. It's going to be more kind of mainstream tech. So I've got some really fun stuff that I'm excited to share with you.
Well, you know, it's funny you say that, because when I was going through my drawers, I was noticing that a lot of the stuff I was wanting to bring out to show wasn't assistive tech either. And it's partly because, I guess, what I want to show here is just the kind of kit that I love, that you love, that we loved a long time ago, or perhaps even up till recently. I think for me, a lot of technology has turned into apps for me, and that's where my life has changed. Yeah. But you know, there's still a place for all of this technology. Well, some of it perhaps, maybe not so much of it. You can make that decision for yourself when you see what I've got. But you know, what is fascinating to me is that there is so much technology out there, and you say your stuff isn't particularly accessible or assistive. But the whole point is that we as people, never mind blind people, just people, want to have fun, want to have a good life, want to enjoy ourselves, and we do that using all kinds of technology. And the stuff I'm going to show is actually very accessible, but it's all mainstream kit.
How far back, if you were to try and carbon date, obviously not yourself, but carbon date some of the tech we're going to be talking about this week, how far back does it go? I try to figure out a time frame. I'm thinking mine goes back to probably late 80s, maybe early 90s, with a couple items I've got in store for you guys.
Yeah, I'm probably the same, maybe a little bit earlier in the 80s with one particular item, the one I'll probably start off with. Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember what year it came out. I should know this because I used to host a lot of top 10 shows in the past, so I should know the answer to this, but I can't remember offhand, but I'm sure you'll know. You're the expert on all these things, so I'm sure you'll know.
Oh, yeah, of course. What you're saying is you hope that I can Google it quick enough to find the answer to the question when we actually bring it up. Well, you know what? We invite you guys to send us some videos of you going through your drawers. If you want to, again, the email address is feedback@AMI.CA. You can even send it to us on Twitter at @DoubleTapCanada and use the hashtag AskDoubleTap. But after we come back from a break, you and I are going to dive into our kit and get into our drawers, and you can get an idea of the stuff that we hang on to for probably absolutely no reason other than having an episode like this. It is Double Tap TV. He is Stephen Scott. I am Mark Aflalo. We're back after a quick break.
Love Double Tap TV? Listen to AMI Audio for Double Tap Canada every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern for news and reviews on everything tech. This is Double Tap TV.
We are back on Double Tap TV. Stephen Scott and Mark Aflalo with you. Again, email address, extremely important because we want to hear from you guys. Feedback@AMI.CA, and of course on Twitter @DoubleTapCanada with that hashtag AskDoubleTap. Stephen, I would not be a proper gentleman if I wouldn't let you dive into some of your kit before I get going. So where do you want to start this journey into our past?
Well, I think that's very kind of you, Mark. That's the first and probably the last time that'll ever happen. But let's dive right in. So this is my very first cassette tape player. To most people, it would be known as the Walkman. By Sony, of course. Sony? We always have this argument. I don't know which one. Sony. I think we had this argument at CES. But yeah, so this one's cool because it's not only got a Walkman in it, but it was an upgraded one because it had the FM and AM radio built in as well. How cool! It had a big, lots of nice little tactile buttons around it. Very tactile device, which I loved. Big clunky buttons. I loved this little thing, and I've used it so much. I actually checked. I was hoping I'd find something inside, but there are, alas, no cassette tapes in there. But yeah, I absolutely loved my Sony Walkman.
So to answer the question that we had before the break, the original Sony Walkman was actually released in 1979. I think it was probably a generation or two behind what you're holding there, because it had the blue design and it had these metallic buttons on the side that really gave you. I mean, I know yours also did the good clunk when you hit play and fast forward, but the original one, there was no auto reverse. Listen to that. Let's hear it again.
And look at that.
That reminds me of like one of the first remote controls I saw for a television at my grandmother's house.
I remember those, yeah.
They call them clickers, and I think that generation is no longer calling those remote controls clickers anymore, but because they actually made click sounds like that. And it's funny that you bring up the Walkman, because that leads me into one of the first items I have, which is. This is, obviously, this is a cassette tape, but an original cassette tape. I mean, they had, the magnetic ribbon inside. And believe it or not, there are people who are watching this show today and people who are listening to us that have never experienced listening to anything on a cassette tape, let alone what a cassette tape even looks like.
I know. My question to you is, though, is it a C60 or a C90?
This is a C60.
Okay.
I could tell you where it's from, because this has on it one of my first radio air checks.
No way.
So when I first, when I first started in the business, I don't think I was paid for this yet. I was working in the newsroom of a local radio station in Montreal, and they said, "Okay, Mark, we need you to go go read a newscast." And every one of our control rooms had a cassette deck that whenever you turned a microphone on, it would start recording,
right,
so you could air check yourself.
Yeah.
So your boss could listen back to you and say, "Hey, let's take a listen to that together," and you'd turn red and you'd be embarrassed. And this says, "Aflalo, December 23 evenings." So this is an air check that in who knows what year. I could probably listen back to it. Maybe that's another episode where we embarrass ourselves and go back into time.
I need to somehow get this Walkman to you, Mark. If I could just pass it through the screen to you.
Well, it's funny that you brought up the Walkman, because I don't have any method of listening to this anymore, because I never kept any of my Walkmans. So I definitely need to get my hands on that or another cassette recorder. Do you got anything else lying around
it's
there?
Funny you say that, actually. I've got two things which could be useful to you. I do have a second cassette tape. Now, this cassette tape recorder, which I used to have, this is a very large, but considered at the time portable, because, wait for it, it's got a pull-out handle at the bottom. That makes it portable. You can carry it around. This thing's like the size of a fairly decent book, but it's got the top-loading tape deck on it with obviously all the buttons, which were fairly tactile for the time. It had a speaker inside as well, which was nice. And I actually used to use this. I used to plug in headphones, and I would actually use this all the time to listen to my class lessons that'd be recorded on here. Or, for example, I had somebody who would read books or anything I maybe had to read in class in school that I had to learn. I would have to get it on tape first. So some poor teacher somewhere would have to sit and record it all on this machine. She would hit record and play. Remember those days? Make sure you hit record and play. On some cases, they would go down together, as this one does. But then what you would do is you would listen back on this, and I could listen back on my own or my class time, or indeed at home, which was absolutely brilliant. And that was portable in the 90s.
And that was one of the first, I guess, business machines that actually were created, I think, again, by Sony. I think Sony kind of pioneered that, but I know Panasonic went into making those, and they were called business machines because a lot of times you'd see doctors, psychologists recording a lot of things into them, and then you'd have their secretaries transcribing all their notes. So you'd see those on secretary desks when you go into the doctor's office, and they'd be constantly stop, start, type, stop, start, type. So that's why it became a business machine. I think it was only later on where this started becoming more of an entertainment tool, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if this one can do it. I've never tried it, but I know that at school we had similar to this, which... and they were strange little machines that were kind of triangular, and we always used them for French class. You'd listen to the French lesson, and then you'd have to remember what they said, and you'd read it back and all this. And I was terrible at it, I should point that out. Apologies to every French Canadian person listening. But what was interesting was that it had a foot pedal, and you could control it with the foot pedal, and I loved that, and I would still love that, because for someone who takes their notes audibly a lot of times, having something that you could just go back and forward with your feet rather than having to constantly use your hands to stop-start when your hands are on a keyboard. I'm starting to hanker back, Mark. Maybe I might get the power supply out and start using this again. But look, for you...
Wait a second. I'm sure we can... Hang on. Can't we replace that with an app? Maybe there's an app where we can create a Bluetooth foot pedal that starts and stops.
I think there is one by... And I'm trying to remember the company name that makes it. I want to say it's the guys behind... I can't remember the microphone's name, but we'll look it up and we'll definitely let you know at some point. But there definitely is a foot pedal you can buy, which is Bluetooth. I think it's mainly for drummers and for people who want to use that kind of stuff, but all of that can be adjusted for us. I think we're creating something here, Mark. But look, before we do that, I want to hear this demo tape of yours, so I think you need one of these. This is an Ion, and I got this ages ago. This is from Ion. It's a cassette tape to USB. Brilliant. This is exactly what you need. I love it because I'm able to take all my old Aircheck tapes, like you, and put them onto my computer. You just connect it up to the computer via USB, install the software if it's on a PC. A Mac just figures it out, I'm just saying. But it is absolutely brilliant. But what's also nice is it still has fairly decent clunky buttons. Listen to that.
I love the clunky buttons. So that is, was, I guess, one of the first ways you could start digitizing things. And that probably came out, that was probably about 5-6 years ago, quite honestly, when people started dubbing down old cassettes. I mean, now you've got this in turntable mode, where you have turntables that are USB that people can record their vinyl back. Some people are doing it with, CDs, dubbing CDs or putting things on CD. I have a technology in my hand here, Stephen, that... They tried to commercialize and mini discs. This is a Maxell mini disc. It's basically it's a size of about 2 inches squared, and it has a little writable disc inside it that allowed you to store, at the time, CD quality, if not better sound, onto this little disc. And they tried so hard to commercialize this and make this popular, but it just never picked up. And I think it was because CDs started dropping in prices and the ability to write CDs yourself dropped so dramatically. But I love this, especially in the broadcast world, because they were pretty indestructible. I mean, take a listen to, it's like a CD in a hard shell case. So you'd pop this in the machine, you hit play, record, you can drop this thing, you can bump it would never skip because it was a different kind of technology that was reading it. But did you ever have any mini disc players? Probably in the broadcasting background you had some that were going around.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, I must have some lines still somewhere. I don't know where they are, but I loved my mini disc recorders, and one of the things that I loved most about them was because you could record, and you could record such great quality. So, for me, it was about recording interviews when I was out and about in my work job. I used to use them all the time. The only problem was that in order to get the audio off of it, like nowadays, if you want to get a file off your phone, you can share it to your computer. Say if you've got like voice memos on your phone, and if you've got a Mac, if you're lucky enough to have a Mac, you can, just open up the voice memos app and it's there. You can just go and get it. What you had to do is you had to connect it up via an audio cable, a 3.5mm cable. You'd have to plug in, you'd have to connect it to something, possibly a computer, in which case a 3.5mm at the other end. And then you'd have to set up your recorder on your computer. Then you'd have to set up...
In real time.
You'd have to play it back in real time. And, for a guy who worked in news, that was difficult because you were often needing to work pretty quick, But no, I mean, it was a great piece of technology. Just sadly, it never lasted. A bit like my final one here, for the moment, just to mention this. This is my little DAB radio. Remember, now, DAB radios...
Oh, of course.
And I've got an FM one as well, in fairness, but the DAB radio is a great piece of kit. But again, why do I need this when I've got an Amazon Echo and I've got a phone... what am I going to do with this anymore? It's such a shame.
You know what? It's just, it's so funny how you talk about stuff like that, because it just brings me back to those days where, you know, they were trying to digitize things, but they didn't really make that full circle. Other than that Walkman, that recorder from cassette to USB, that was basically a good way to kind of walk away and digitize. You didn't have to worry about things. I've got some more stuff coming up, but I know you do as well. We're going to take a quick break. It is Double Tap TV. He is Stephen Scott. I am Mark Aflalo. When we come back, I'll just tell you right now, the original iPad is coming up on Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit AMI.CA/DoubleTap. This is Double Tap TV.
We are back on Double Tap TV. Mark Aflalo and Stephen Scott with you. Before the break, I told you what I'm going to break out, Stephen, and I gotta tell you the story behind the original iPad, because I'm not sure how it was released where you live in the UK, but I know in Canada, the original iPad did not actually come out in Canada. They started with the iPad, I think it was the 3G, which was the second generation that it came out. So I happened to be traveling in the US, and the iPad had just come out. I decided, let me go to the Apple Store and check this thing out. And I got in line, and they had plenty of stock. And I kept getting texts from people, Stephen, saying, hey, if you can you pick one up? Hi, can you pick one up? And of course, you have limits on how much you can bring home, right? So that trip was a 10-day trip. I remember I came home with 3 original iPads, okay? With their cases, and if you remember back in the day, the iPad, funny enough, the original iPad, it's about the same size as the current generation iPad Pros, physically, in your hand. Obviously, way thinner than it was back then. It had kind of that bubble design because it needed to make room for the battery. But it was, in its day, this was light and sleek. But the case they had, this leather case they had, was one of the coolest things they ever had, but it was just a pocket. There were no magnets that were keeping things together. Your iPads weren't, stuck in anything. It was literally, you'd slide the iPad into this leather sleeve, you'd tuck the corner in underneath, and that was the sleeve for the iPad. There was even like stitched edges around the sides, which was really cool. Anyhow, that trip, I sent home about 7 by FedEx or UPS, and I brought home 3. Only one of which actually stayed with me. And at the time, man, these were like $700 to $800 US. So that was a lot of money people owed me for basically smuggling these back into the country. But, this is one of those kits that I'm never going to get rid of, because it just... Back in 2007, when Steve Jobs, not 2007, it was 2010, I believe, when he unveiled the original iPad. I mean, this changed our industry. This changed really everything.
Yeah, it did. And it's interesting because I often thought when it came out, what on earth am I going to do with this? I was never really sure about the iPad at all. And then it was like anything else Apple. As soon as I got my hands on it, I thought, oh, I want one. I love it. I think it was first the design. Apple's design just grabs you every single time. And I think if you can get that, once you get past that, then you start to get into the reasons as to why you want it. And of course, we all fell in love with the iPad, didn't we? But interestingly, talking of Apple devices, of course, I'm not going to go through an entire episode of Double Tap TV and not mention something with Apple's logo on it. I've got with me here, and I hope I can get this on to show you. This is the iPad Nano. And this iPad Nano, which I adore, and I actually still use it to this day, which is interesting. That's why I switched on, because I still use it. But it is in my drawer because I tend to listen to my music more on my phone, and I listen to it on my Amazon Echo. But I do love this. I love the design of it. It's very small. It's like a packet of chewing gum that you've stamped with your foot. Which is an interesting way to describe it, I suppose. But it comes with a lovely little case as well. It's just really nice. It's slick. It's very thin as well. It's thinner than most smartphones, I would guess, but really nice. And what I love about it is this has got 16 gig on it, so I can cram it full of music. It still connects via the classic Lightning port, so you don't have to worry about any connection issues yet. It's not like the 30-pin connectors you used to get. Remember those?
Yeah. Oh, I do.
You still got your headphone port on there as well, but you can listen through Lightning if you want. But the other big draw of this for me is that it actually has, believe it or not, voiceover built in. Voiceover built into this thing. Now, these are discontinued. You can't buy these anymore unless you buy them on eBay or you pick them up secondhand somewhere. But they are really good. They work really well. Everything on the screen is accessible, even if you can't see at all. And because it's quite a small system, it's actually really easy. And I think a lot of people thought it was going to be the precursor to what would become the watch. And it kind of did in a way, but certainly from an accessibility point of view, it was really, really good. So I loved that. Did you ever have one of those kind of iPods?
I had the original iPad Nano, which was the little clip-on one. It was a little tiny square, and it would clip onto your shirt and have a little microphone jack. You'd have to plug it in via a proprietary cable that plugged into the headphone jack. I think it maybe had 4 gigs of storage on it, maybe, if that.
And it talked as well.
Yeah, it did talk. It did. I remember that and that was one of the first devices that had, music players that had no touch screen, no screen at all. It was literally only a voiceover driven device other than play and stop.
And that was for everybody. That was the amazing thing. And this is the thing for me. You know, I talk a lot about technology and how important this mainstream stuff is. But the fact is that Apple were a company who really got it right, and that's why, you know, it didn't just create something that was for blind people. They created something for everybody. And that particular device was a great example of technology that was built for everybody, but by God did it help blind people. I've got to mention a blind piece of kit.
Go for it.
I say that as a specialist piece of kit. Do you remember Dymo? Remember Dymo labelers?
I still use Dymo labelers. I have one of the P-Touch ones that you can use with an app. I still have one of the not the manual ones where you had to kind of slide the letters around, but I used to have those where you'd literally punch the plastic with the letters.
Yep, that's right. Well, I used to have one of those years ago as well, but I don't have one of those now. But what I do have is a blind version. Yes, there is a blind version of the Dymo labeler, and it's an incredible thing. This is a Dymo labeler for Braille. Think about it, right? When you were using your Dymo labeler, like you were saying, you were punching the letters into the tape, right? That's
actually
exactly
imprinting it, literally. Very cool.
Yeah, and that's exactly how this works. So you just turn the little dial round to the letter you want, and you just crank it. You give it a good push, and this is a noisy piece of kit when you get using it.
Oh yeah.
But this is solid. I mean, you know, this is going to go through a window if you're not careful. But it is a really good piece of kit, and so well built, so solid. I still use this today because I label, for example, all the plugs in my house, so I know what's plugged in where. Any cables I've got, I wrap one of these around it with the Braille label on it. You know, coming back to Braille as I have in the last few years, it's made a real difference to my life. So yeah, the Braille label, which you can still buy, they're still on sale. You can still get them today. The new versions are made of plastic though, not quite as good as the old one I've got here. But I got this courtesy of a very kind friend, shall we say. And you know, just for me, I'm so excited here. I've got so much to show you, Mark. I don't know how much time we've got, but just quickly to mention this. This is the Fitbit Charge HR2 watch. Now, this is a smart watch to all intents and purposes. And what I liked about this watch, notice I said liked, was that at the time it was very good at tracking your heart rate. It was fairly affordable as well. And it was accessible to a point. The app is accessible. That's the good news. You can use everything in real time from the app. But none of this is accessible in the front. So as my sight got worse, I just couldn't use it anymore. And that's why it ended up in the bin.
Honorable mentions to my Motorola Razr, the original one. I still have that in my kit. The original iPad, the original iPod. So honorable mentions to that as well. I wish we had way more time to get through to all of this, but we unfortunately don't, Stephen. So if you guys have anything that you want to contribute, it's feedback@AMI.CA. Of course, on Twitter @DoubleTapCanada with the hashtag #AskDoubleTap. On behalf of Stephen Scott, I am Mark Aflalo. Thank you guys so much for being here. We will speak to you again next week here on Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit AMI.CA/DoubleTap.
Hosted by Mark Aflalo and Stephen Scott. Editing, Willatar and Mark Aflalo. Production assistants, Wendy KAUFMAN. Integrated Described Video Specialist, Ron Rickford. Coordinating Producer, Jennifer Johnson. Director Production, Kara Nye. Director Programming, Brian Perdue. VP Programming and Production, John Melville. President and CEO, David Errington. Copyright 2020, Accessible Media, Inc.